Welcome to CIS 209. This topic is going to discuss data modeling, particularly about entities and their types. Data modeling, first of all, let's get a definition of what it is. A data model is a graphical representation that's a picture, usually a diagram, of the things that are of importance to the business, how those things or objects interrelate to each other. So it's a model of the things and the relationships between those things that the business needs clarity on. A highest level model would be called a subject model, the highest abstraction you can, showing only the biggest things of interest. For instance, you might just be discussing a customer purchases products, and a product is purchased by customers. So you wouldn't necessarily extend this down into a many-to-many, but you'd just say that the relationship is many-to-many and leave it right there. Or you might say that a product may be purchased from one or more suppliers. So you're really staying at a very, very high level of detail. The conceptual model then is also said to be a high-level model, but not quite as abstracted as highly, perhaps, as the subject model. Conceptual model is also sometimes referred to as a business entity model. The business entity is a term that comes to us from business architecture, but literally these things are very comparative. So by definition, then, a logical data model, as opposed to a conceptual or physical one, is more of the technique. Logical data modeling is more of a technique to discover and document and gain an understanding of information data structures and the relationships of how the business treats the data. We can collectively call these a set of business rules around the data and how the data is related to each other. So the logical data model, then, would be the conceptual intuitive representative of the structure and behavior of data in the business. Probably not so much the behavior in terms of update, insert, and delete, but the rules around how the data is structured. Again, we don't want to tie this to a specific tool or tie it to a specific database like DB2 or Oracle or an architecture such as TOGAF or Zachman. We want to think of this as vendor and technique implementation independent. An entity type is a term coined by Steve Hoberman in one of his books. Again, it's a person, place, or thing, or it could be a conceptual thing about which the business needs to first store the data and then later retrieve information about. So one of the things we do with databases is we take in data and we churn out information where we show relationships and show a wider picture of the thing. It can be a physical thing like a person or a building. Could be a conceptual thing, contract, account. Sometimes organizational structures are also thought of as conceptual things. Can be an event, something that occurs in time, a sporting event. Could be a bank deposit, but those are also valid types of entities. So physical, conceptual, or time-based event, all valid types of entities, categorizations of entity types. Some examples of physical entity types. You've got persons. So a person could be a student or an instructor or an employee. You have places like buildings or rooms, warehouses, depots, train stations, anything that occupies a geographical space, I would think, where people use it for common activity. Merchandise, such as a product, a production component, could be something we sell or buy. And then there's kind of a catch-all miscellaneous category. You could talk about furniture, you could talk about supplies, probably lots of other things. If you're talking about household insurance coverage, you're going to want to know what the things are, the pieces of furniture or jewelry that are being insured. Those, again, would be things, like could be merchandise or supplies. You could have a policy, which is, again, more of a conceptual thing. But these are examples of physical types. Under the heading of conceptual types, you have financial things like checking accounts, savings accounts, an account receivable, an invoice. We talked about an insurance policy being a type of a contract. So we have organizational structures that are literally conceptual. You have corporate structures. Government agencies have a physical nature to them in that you have an agency, but the agency could go away tomorrow. They could, by law of Congress, eliminate an entire agency or create a new agency. Departments within an organization could also be thought of as just a hierarchical organization technique. And then you have agreements like loans, leases, and contracts, which are also conceptual things. For sure, you have money in your bank account, but the bank account is literally just an agreement between you and your bank that they will hold your money for you and then they will pay you interest or charge you money or both. So you have events that occur in time. States are a little bit different, but we can treat those similarly when we're talking about their transitions. But events always involve some moment in time. Financial events could be a deposit, a withdrawal, interest payment, a fee occurrence, a closing or an opening of an account. Mechanical events come to us from our manufacturing sector. You have things like production runs. You might be tracking the mechanical malfunctions that interfere with and delay a production run. Big data is all about machine sensors, not all about, but a lot of big data comes from mechanical sensors, aircraft engine sensors, black boxes, things like that, recording mechanical events. You also have sporting events, which many of us are familiar with, a game played by two teams at a stadium at a particular time, a tournament, maybe a series of games that are played. Another type of transaction event would be a transaction where goods or services are exchanged for money, an order, a trade, or a sale. Could be an example of this. Very prevalent. There's a transaction pattern, as you saw. And then you have states and states transitions where an entity goes from one state to another. An employee goes from being a new hire to being having passed their probation period and then maybe possibly being retired or even terminated. A price might have a change that occurs on a particular schedule or upon some notification trigger. And a schedule, you might have a schedule of production runs, or you might have a daily schedule, and you're thinking about meetings that are about to occur, and they go from a state of planned to a state of occurrence. All these things are event-type entities. Some people question how an event can be an entity. Well, it certainly can if you're tracking something that occurs in time. So one thing about entities we want to be careful about is we want to name them in a standard manner. We typically use the singular version when naming an entity type. You have the examples of customer as opposed to customers, order as opposed to order, product as opposed to products. We want to make sure we clearly distinguish between an entity type, which is the thing, and entity occurrences, which are would be the rows or instances of the thing. So we'd have John Smith, the student, would be an occurrence of entity type employee, or entity type John Smith, the student. Finally, I'd like to leave you with this taxonomy of entities. It may help you mentally to categorize your entities as lookups. These are things, again, that categorize or provide valid values for another entity. You might see a drop-down list where you can select a salutation like Mr. or Ms. Well, again, that's a lookup of types of salutations. You might have a value list of perhaps departments. You don't want the user to just type in any old department number. There's a fixed set of departments. So maybe want to know what item a department is associated with. That would be a categorization thing. A subject, I like to think of these as the main things we store data about: customer, employee, product. Transactions then would be the things that occur in time that we track. We'll find that as we go through this, lookups are usually one-side relations, being related to many-side subjects or many-side events. But they provide categorization for those. You might have a product type. You might have a customer classification. Again, you could have them as domain lookups, for instance, day of the week, which is a lookup list, or you may have them by a categorization of something. But typically, your subjects will be one-sides related to many-side transactions. So you kind of see this chain of a lookup categorizing a subject and a subject triggering or being involved with a transaction.